The night was designed to impress. Crystal chandeliers reflected off polished marble floors. Photographers snapped pictures of executives who practiced their smiles more than their leadership, and the air smelled of expensive perfume and inflated egos. The annual gala was supposed to be a celebration of success, a night where achievements were showcased and loyalty rewarded. After 12 years of service, 12 years of balancing budgets, negotiating contracts, and correcting mistakes others pretended never happened, I expected nothing more than a quiet evening. As I stood beside my wife, sipping a drink and exchanging polite greetings, the CEO climbed the stage. His tuxedo was tailored, his smile theatrical. I assumed he was about to boast about record profits or unveil another expansion plan. Instead, his tone turned cold, and my name rolled off his tongue with the weight of a verdict. He announced my termination, effective immediately, before an audience of employees, investors, and potential partners. Gasps rippled across the room. A spotlight landed on me as if I were a criminal caught mid-act. My wife's grip tightened, her nails pressing into my palm, trying to anchor me to a moment that felt unreal. Colleagues I had mentored avoided eye contact. Some stared at their shoes, others faked concern while calculating how to distance themselves. The applause that followed was hesitant and confused, forced by those unsure whether to obey power or question it. The CEO offered no explanation, no accusation, no justification, not even a fabricated reason for the spectacle. He didn't fire me privately. He sentenced me publicly. A waiter passed by, and I noticed his expression held more sympathy than anyone from management. In that instant, humiliation mixed with clarity. This wasn't spontaneous. It was planned. Executives whispered among themselves, some smirking, others terrified of being seen near me. My badge access was revoked within minutes, as though 12 years of dedication could be erased by a single announcement. I watched the celebration resume, but something fundamental had shifted. They believed I would leave defeated, crushed under the weight of public embarrassment. They underestimated what silence can hide. That night was not my downfall. It was the spark that ignited a process they didn't understand. They thought they had closed a chapter. They had merely turned the page of a book I wrote. Most people leave a job carrying personal belongings, a framed photo, a plant, maybe a farewell speech rehearsed in the car. I walked out with none of those. Instead, tucked under my arm was a simple, unmarked folder. No one noticed it. They were too busy pretending my dismissal was just another corporate decision, not a public execution dressed in evening wear. They believed shock would erase my dignity. They never imagined I had spent months preparing for the moment they tried to erase me. Inside that folder was not paperwork. It was a digital audit log only someone who built the financial architecture of the company could access, let alone interpret. For years, executives mocked my attention to detail. They called me obsessive, too meticulous, incapable of thinking big. Ironically, the same precision they dismissed became the blade they would eventually fear. The log contained entries that should not exist, invoices without suppliers, transfers routed through unfamiliar accounts, and bonuses distributed to upper management without the board's signature. Once home, I sat at my desk and opened the file. The screen lit up with patterns I had flagged months earlier, numbers arranged like footprints leading to a truth no one wanted discovered. At first, I thought it was carelessness. But the deeper I went, the more obvious it became. This wasn't incompetence. It was orchestration. Someone had created a financial labyrinth designed to hide unauthorized withdrawals, siphoned funds, and personal indulgences disguised as corporate strategy. Then, clarity struck like a hammer. My termination wasn't spontaneous. It was preemptive. They needed someone to blame before the cracks widened. A respectable scapegoat with enough reputation to absorb the impact. I was the perfect candidate, loyal, hardworking, technically irreplaceable, and therefore dangerous. Removing me publicly ensured witnesses. Humiliation became camouflage for panic. My so-called over-detailed habit, mocked in meetings, became a weapon sharpened by years of diligence. Every transaction had a timestamp. Every anomaly had a digital fingerprint. I didn't need to invent anything. The truth was already there, waiting for someone with the courage to look. That night, I realized something profound. They had fired me to silence a threat. They forgot threats evolve. They mistook calm for surrender. They assumed I walked away empty-handed. They had no idea I carried their downfall in a folder no one thought to check. The board of directors sat atop the company like a council of untouchable monarchs. Most of them rarely stepped inside the operational floors. They saw quarterly reports, not the sleepless nights behind them. They trusted the CEO the way passengers trust a seasoned pilot, without question, without proof. To them, the gala was a symbol of stability, another year of growth, another round of numbers that justified their confidence. They believed what he told them because it was easier than thinking for themselves. When I requested a private meeting after my dismissal, they treated it as a formality, a disgruntled employee seeking closure. The chairman entered late, distracted, glancing at his phone. A few smirked when they saw me. They believed the CEO's version of the story, whatever it was, and assumed I had come to plead for reconsideration. Their posture changed the moment I placed my laptop on the conference table and connected it to the main screen. I began with transactions so small they seemed harmless. A few unexplained vendor transfers, budget reallocations, minor discrepancies no one cared to question. Their expressions remained indifferent until the patterns shifted. Suddenly, numbers weren't numbers anymore. They were breadcrumbs. Shell companies with no physical addresses. Consulting fees paid to entities with no employees. Budgets approved without signatures or timestamps. Dead projects resurrected long enough to drain funds. Money that left the company without ever arriving anywhere traceable. The CFO had always prided himself on hiding inconsistencies behind financial jargon. What he didn't anticipate was that I had duplicated his hidden ledger, line by line, authorization by authorization. When I projected that ledger on the screen, the temperature in the room changed. Chairs stopped creaking. Pens stopped tapping. The chairman leaned forward, finally seeing something he should have questioned years ago. One board member, known for dismissing concerns like flies at a picnic, dropped his arrogance. His voice trembled when he asked me to continue. Another removed his glasses, studying the data as if it were a confession carved in stone. They had trusted the CEO blindly, and now they were staring into the abyss created by that trust. Then, the words I had been waiting for slipped through the room, quiet but powerful enough to shift an empire, show us everything. The board didn't realize it yet, but that sentence didn't open a file. It opened a war. Fear doesn't begin with shouting, it begins with realization. The moment the board asked me to continue, the corporate hierarchy shifted. Executives who once strutted across the building as if they owned oxygen itself now paused when I walked by. They weren't afraid of me personally. They were afraid of what I knew, because knowledge, when precise and inconvenient, becomes a weapon no one can disarm. Within hours of my meeting with the board, my phone lit up with invitations disguised as opportunities for clarification. People who ignored my emails for years suddenly wanted to hear my perspective. The chief operating officer requested a call to smooth things over. The head of legal suggested dinner to redefine expectations. The CFO's assistant nervously asked if I had other files I wished to share. They spoke softly, but their eyes betrayed the truth. They were terrified of what else I might expose. I didn't raise my voice in any of these conversations. I didn't accuse them or demand apologies. I simply asked precise questions, questions that carried timestamps, account numbers, and missing authorizations. Questions no one in that building could answer without incriminating themselves. The silence that followed each one told me everything I needed to know. They weren't defending their actions, they were scrambling for narratives. That night, I stopped being a former employee. I became a variable, an unpredictable force capable of shifting careers, exposing alliances, and unraveling reputations built on hollow authority. The executives, once united by arrogance, now fragmented into factions. Some tried to align with me, praising my dedication and loyalty. Others distanced themselves from the CEO, pretending they always harbored doubts about his leadership. The company's walls, once echoing with confidence, were now saturated with suspicion. People whispered in hallways, avoided eye contact, and stepped aside when I passed. My presence turned executive lounges into interrogation rooms. Even the CEO, who had humiliated me publicly, avoided direct contact, delegating others to manage the situation. The irony was undeniable. I didn't threaten anyone. I didn't leak information. I didn't file complaints. All I did was exist, with the truth on my side. They fired me believing they had buried a problem. They didn't bury a problem. They buried evidence, and forgot that evidence sometimes walks back into the room. That night marked the beginning of something far more dangerous than revenge. It marked the beginning of accountability. The board's decision to authorize a forensic audit didn't land like a thunderclap. It crept quietly, like a draft under a locked door. But once it entered, it spread everywhere. The announcement was made on a Wednesday morning, and by lunchtime, the company's entire executive floor smelled of panic. People who once boasted about transparency now avoided eye contact. The arrogance that filled the hallways evaporated, replaced by nervous calculators clicking keys a bit too loudly. The auditors arrived without warning, neutral outside professionals with no loyalty to preserve and no careers to protect inside the company. Armed with authority and subpoenas, they requested access to files that had conveniently gone missing. Servers suddenly experienced technical difficulties. Laptops were rushed for emergency updates. Emails vanished from archives as if swallowed by the building itself. It would have been comical if it weren't so predictable. What the executives didn't know was that every document they tried to erase already existed in my private archive. Long before my termination, I anticipated irregularities. I had duplicated invoices, transaction logs, and internal memos, copies timestamped, encrypted, and stored beyond their reach. When the auditors asked if I had any supporting material, I handed them a drive that turned speculation into proof. From that moment, the investigation gained momentum. The inconsistencies the CFO once dismissed as clerical oversight now appeared as deliberate manipulation. Payments routed through companies that dissolved years earlier. Board approvals that bore signatures of people who were abroad on those dates. Marketing expenses recorded for campaigns that never happened. Every line item was a thread, and the auditors tugged until the tapestry unraveled. Meetings became interrogations. Executives stumbled through explanations, sentences collapsing under the weight of their own contradictions. The CFO tried to mask fraud with jargon, but each excuse sounded less like a defense and more like a confession whispered in slow motion. For the first time, he wasn't the one asking questions, he was the one answering them. The audit wasn't loud. It didn't need volume. It crushed reputations silently, methodically, leaving no room for reinvention. What began as a routine review became a siege they had no way to escape, because the truth wasn't coming from inside the company. It was coming from the one person they thought they had silenced. And this time, the numbers weren't on their side. The invitation described it as a milestone celebration, an evening dedicated to announcing new shareholders and showcasing the company's bright future. The venue dripped with luxury. Velvet curtains, towering floral arrangements, and a stage polished so thoroughly it reflected the ceiling lights like a mirror. Executives rehearsed speeches filled with promises, projections, and carefully crafted lies. They believed the noise of celebration would drown out the growing whispers of doubt. They were wrong. 30 minutes after the event began, the atmosphere shifted. The chatter didn't fade gradually, it collapsed. The oversized doors opened, and in strode the board of directors, not dressed for applause, but armed for accountability. With them came attorneys holding folders thick enough to bury careers. Subpoenas were stacked like tombstones. Evidence packets labeled with dates, signatures, and transactions were handed out like unwanted party favors. The room froze. The microphone that once announced my termination now carried a different message. The truth they worked so hard to bury had arrived dressed in legal authority. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Champagne glasses trembled. Executives who once smirked in confidence turned pale, realizing this wasn't a celebration. It was a reckoning. The CFO was the first to be called. His confident stride became a stumbling retreat when auditors displayed the financial breadcrumbs he thought he had swept away. His suspension was declared on the spot. The CEO attempted a speech, something about misunderstanding and loyalty, but the board cut him short. He stepped back from leadership, his once commanding voice replaced by silence that echoed louder than any accusation. Executives who mocked me only weeks before now formed a reluctant line, badges in hand. Their smiles, once used as shields, evaporated. No one dared to speak. The ambience of success, curated through speeches and decor, dissolved into an airless tension that felt like grief. The lights no longer highlighted ambition. They exposed guilt. There was no music, no applause, no rescue. The party's decorations remained intact, but the illusion they were meant to reinforce lay shattered at everyone's feet. Chairs stayed upright, yet careers collapsed. The company had come to celebrate a future that no longer existed. They thought they controlled the narrative. They forgot that truth doesn't RSVP. It arrives when it's ready, and this time, it came dressed for closure. In the days following the failed celebration, the company operated like a ship without a compass. Departments stalled, suppliers demanded clarification, and investors, once seduced by glossy presentations, now wanted measurable answers. Every system that once seemed seamless revealed invisible fractures. The executives who once boasted about innovation discovered that no software could replicate the one thing they forfeited at the gala: the person who knew how everything worked. It began with cautious emails, brief, apologetic, and vague. Then came direct calls from senior board members, polite at first, then desperate. They didn't want me back as staff. They offered something far more revealing: a consultancy agreement. The hourly rate they proposed was higher than my old monthly salary. The irony was delicious. The same voices that once dismissed my expertise now treated it like oxygen. I didn't accept immediately. I let silence answer them first. Silence, I learned, is a mirror. It shows people who they really are. Their messages grew longer, more sincere. They spoke of continuity, stability, and rebuilding trust. Words they never used when they believed I was disposable. They finally understood loyalty wasn't a gift, it was a partnership. And once broken, it wasn't easily repaired. When I finally entered the building again, this time with no badge, no assigned desk, and no obligations, the atmosphere felt different. Eyes that once saw me as a subordinate now saw the one person who could halt the company's collapse. The CEO, stripped of authority, avoided my gaze. The CFO's office sat empty, a reminder of what happens when arrogance meets accountability. Even the security guard greeted me differently, a nod with respect instead of routine. I sat in a conference room while they explained the situation, stumbling over their own panic. Systems depended on processes I designed. Clients demanded assurances I could provide. Projects needed oversight I once offered naturally. They hadn't fired an employee. They had amputated the brain that coordinated their limbs. For the first time, they realized something fundamental: replacing a title is easy, replacing competence is impossible. Their empire wasn't built on charisma, slogans, or visions. It was built on knowledge they tried to discard in a room full of applause. They had thrown me out under a chandelier. Now, they needed me to turn the lights back on. Revenge is often imagined as noise, raised voices, slammed doors, or dramatic confrontations. Mine required none of that. It arrived quietly, carried not by anger, but by ink. The consultancy agreement they begged me to accept became their undoing. With a single signature, I was granted unrestricted access to the systems I had once built. The moment my name hit the page, every dormant process flickered back to life. Operations stabilized. Investors relaxed. Employees exhaled. The company didn't rise because they learned. It rose because I returned. My first task wasn't technical, it was structural. The board requested a comprehensive report on leadership performance. I delivered it with precision, each section supported by evidence collected long before my termination. The CEO's misuse of funds, hidden under layers of jargon, was exposed. His strategic decisions weren't strategies, they were blind gambles funded by other people's trust. The CFO's explanations unraveled further, revealing not mere incompetence, but calculation. Bonuses disguised as incentives. Transactions routed to entities that dissolved long before money reached them. He went from defending spreadsheets to defending himself legally. When my findings were presented, the board took action. The CEO was removed from his position, escorted out of a building he once treated as his kingdom. His retirement package, once guaranteed, evaporated in a single vote. The CFO didn't step down. He was stripped of authority, investigated, and left with nothing but the reputation he earned. Executives who once laughed at my expense stood silent as consequences fell like dominoes. The most surreal moment came during a press conference organized by the board. Cameras clicked. Microphones extended. My name, once associated with humiliation, now accompanied terms like integrity, transparency, and accountability. They credited me publicly, not for revenge, but for restoration. I didn't revel in applause. I let the truth do what truth always does, reveal character. I never raised my voice. I didn't slam doors. I didn't threaten lawsuits. I simply signed documents, submitted reports, and let the chain reaction unfold. They believed firing me destroyed my career. They never imagined it would define theirs. They tried to bury me at a party, surrounded by chandeliers and applause. They forgot I kept the shovel. They fired me in front of a crowd. I exposed them in front of history.